It's a pleasure to have you here, Professor Bert Peeters, Honorary Associate Professor at the Australian National University in Canberra.
To be here.
For us it's a pleasure. Professor Bert Peeters is an expert in linguistics and especially on the natural semantic metalanguage and minimal languages, as we could call them.
Mm-hmm.
So, before entering into the realm of narrative medicine, we would like to have a definition of what is it, this natural semantic metalanguage.
Right, so there's three important words in there: natural, semantic, and metalanguage. So it's a metalanguage, which means that it is basically a tool consisting of words, and in the case of the natural semantic metalanguage, also a grammar. These words and that grammar are universal or near universal, which means that anything that we do in the natural semantic metalanguage can be translated in most, if not all, other languages of the world without any loss of meaning or without any distortion in the meaning of the words that we have used in the English version. So it's a metalanguage. It is semantic because we use it to describe meanings not only of English but of any language spoken anywhere. And it is natural because, importantly, it is a metalanguage that is based on natural languages. So it's not a scientific jargon. It's not a collection of technical words that outsiders don't understand. It is deliberately constructed as a tool that can be immediately understood by anyone, even if they don't have a prior training in linguistics or in particular linguistic models.
So now we are at 65 primes, if I'm correct.
Yes, so the primes...
65 universal words or near universal words.
Correct.
And in these 65 words there is I, you, body, to live, to die, true, say words, to hear, to see, to touch, and to think.
To think is there as well, yes.
To
know, to feel.
No. So what do you think about this mini dictionary that we have, mini language that we have? When I give you my first reaction, when I read these words, I read that there was so much into these 65 words. There were all the mental possible activities, all the possibility of movement as well. So there was so much in these 65 words. What do you think about this 65 primes?
Well, I wouldn't say that there is so much in it, because of course every single language in the world has its own ways of referring to movements and to ways of thinking and ways of feeling and ways of knowing, and it is only the very basic idea of to feel, to think, to know, of I, you, body, want, don't want. It is these very basic concepts that we believe, and that our empirical research has demonstrated, are available in all the languages that we've looked at. And we've literally looked at dozens, if not hundreds, of languages, and we found that this set of 65 words, which you have correctly called semantic primes, are actually available in all these languages. So and it is with these primes and combining them by means of a grammar which is also simple and at the same time universal, that we can make little sentences. We call them components, and a series of components gives us the possibility to explicate in a normal, in an immediately accessible way, concepts that are culturally very specific, concepts that are not immediately intelligible to the outsider. So that is what the natural semantic metalanguage was meant to achieve, to make whatever is culturally specific clear in such a way that both cultural insiders and cultural outsiders can relate to it and can recognize themselves in it. which is a problem that is faced by a lot of other frameworks, not only in linguistics but in other areas as well. It's the use of a terminological jargon that is only really accessible to specialists within the field, and we wanted to have something that you can use also outside of the field.
Basis, in every field.
Basically, the idea is that it could be used, that it could render services in every imaginable field of scientific endeavor. We've got to be careful. We are not talking here about a language such as the English that I'm speaking with you right now. It's not supposed to be a language for normal communication. It will always be a meta language, so a language to talk about language. And of course there will be lots of opportunities or lots of practical circumstances where we can't, for whatever reason, use the meta language as such. It is supposed to be a tool that we use to make things that we may have first explained or that we will eventually explain in culture specific terms, but a tool to take that culture specificity away and to say the same thing in culturally simple, or acultural I should say, terms that are accessible to anyone and that will be understood by anyone in the same way.
I see. And well, we are talking about primes or atoms of meanings.
Yes.
These are the primes. And also we are talking about sometimes about molecules.
Mm-hmm.
So could you give us some example of molecules? Or generally we are using more molecules than atoms probably, like this chemistry.
Yeah, well, of course, the image of molecule is entirely based on chemistry, because what a molecule is basically a combination of primes, or it's a group of atoms, if you like. But so it is a semantically more complex concept that needs to be explicated separately, either in primes only or in a combination of more basic molecules and primes, and they are used sparingly but in a hopefully realistic way to help us with explications that would otherwise become too burdensome or too difficult to understand. Because if you've only got 65 concepts to work with, you can imagine that if you want to explicate culturally specific words that are really very, very much bound to a particular culture, you may need pages and pages and pages to do so, and that's not practical. So there comes a point where we have to admit certain concepts, well-chosen concepts. You can't turn anything into a semantic molecule, but well-chosen concepts that remain as universal as possible.
And this is the creation of the minimal language.
And that was the first step towards the creation of what we now call minimal English. Yes.
Minimal English, minimal Italian,
of course,
minimal French.
Because just like the natural semantic metalanguage, there are as many varieties of the natural semantic metalanguage as there are languages. Because what I say in an English NSM, or what I formulate in an English NSM, could be translated in an Italian NSM, or in a Swahili NSM, or in a Waupiri NSM, to use an Aboriginal example from Australia. It could be used in any of it. It could be translated in any of these other languages, and of course, minimal English is a byproduct or an offspring from the natural semantic metalanguage, which is, of course, as its name suggests, based on the English version of the NSM, but there is no reason why there should indeed not be a minimal Spanish, a minimal Italian, a minimal whatever. So all languages can have a minimal version.
Yes. So we are here to talk about these tools like natural semantic metalanguage and minimal English or minimal Italian, minimal French, is because we are using these tools for creating the plots to collect patients' narratives, physicians' narratives, and caregivers' narratives. Without knowing, as he stood, without knowing that we were using the natural semantic metalanguage primes or part of the minimal language, we were already using this kind of universals because we didn't want to bias the collection of narratives. We didn't want to bring our culture to of course this is quite impossible, but to bring to stay the most neutral we could.
Mm-hmm.
This was our intention, which is a scientific kind of behavior, I would say. So we have used this, and then we met together, and we have developed that illness plot. And this is why we have been working together, and now the illness plot has been translated into, well, in Italian, in English, in Portuguese, in French, and in Spanish, and also nowadays it will be tested also in Russian. So it will be interesting to see
Absolutely
what it will come out. One thing is to say that with the plots, people who are quite scared because they are scared to talk in a too straight way, or to answer to too straight questions, they feel like protected. They
Mm-hmm.
feel like in a safe space. Would you like to comment on this?
The thing about the use of minimal English in the narrative plots of narrative medicine is, of course, that it is less intimidating. It is because you make a conscious choice of terms and of words that are as much as possible universals of language, that are as much as possible understood, understood in any language, provided they are translated. There are simple translational equivalents for all these words in all the languages of the world. That's the working hypothesis that we've got, and so far we haven't really encountered any serious problems with that hypothesis, and whenever we did encounter something that looked problematical, we have been able to have a closer look at the data, and we have found that after all there is no problem at all to be considered. So it all looks very promising, and it is that use of simple language that obviously puts patients at ease, and that makes it possible for them to open up and to talk about their experience, about their feelings, about their thoughts, about what they know and what they don't know.
Yes, and we have tested it, and we are testing it in people with depression, who are generally people who do not want to talk about themselves. They have a really with very low battery level, so they just don't want to open themselves, and it's working. Magically, it's working. It was the first time that we have done a multiple collection of narrative of people with depressions. So, and the psychiatrists were very skeptical at the beginning, before using this, because they couldn't believe that it was going to work. We have used also this kind of language, minimal language, with people who have I don't want to use this word, but mental handicap, because I don't want to use this word because it's like a label that we are, and I prefer to speak about multiple intelligences than
right.
And well, we were able through these plots to collect also the narratives of children who have mental disabilities. So I think that these words are really...
Again, because you're using words that everybody can understand, and that can be easily translated into other languages. If the people that you work with happen not to understand English, the words that make up minimal English can be, for most of them at least, easily translated into other languages, and thereby they become accessible to these other people, and these other people can share their experiences in minimal Polish or in minimal Russian or in minimal whatever, and it still makes perfect sense, and they can really open up and talk about things, and it will have, of course, for them a very liberating effect, because it allows them to open up and to talk about things that they were unable to talk about before.
It is true, because as you know, we just asked one open question at the end: how did you feel writing your experiences? And they were saying gratitude, they were saying happy, they were saying relieved, they were saying listened. There was somebody who was listening to me. They were saying also a feeling of being worth, or like somebody is acknowledging my story.
Somebody is taking me seriously.
Yes, Yes.
Yep.
And this is thanks to this natural semantic metalanguage. As you know, there is a a dialogue which is going on between people who are more for just the open page, white paper, nothing written, and just going for a free autobiography, and people as we who are trying to be more diachronic. In fact, we start from a past and then a present and and we are moving to a possible future. And we think this is our position in terms of Fondazione Institute, that of course the methodology should be chosen according to what we want to achieve, but the limit that we see in the autobiography is that these people are going to talk and talk and talk like in a ruminating way on the past, and they're not moving forward. So this is why we have somehow chosen this kind of tool, which might be therapeutic by itself somehow.
Yes, indeed, and the fact, of course, that you have this semi-directed style of gathering experiences by or from people who suffer particular conditions means that if you want to ultimately compare what different people with similar conditions say about what they feel and think and know, the fact that you have guided them in the same direction by asking them the same sorts of questions rather than to allow them to talk freely and to get lost in the past and not talk about the present and the future, the fact that you use these semi-guided questions actually allows for comparison of data between patients, and that is going to be such a tremendous help for the progress of treatment of these people.
For the
that you can
organization.
Exactly, that you can talk about, or that you can compare what different people say about similar conditions, and it allows you to gain better knowledge about these conditions in a way that would never be possible if you let people just talk freely about what they feel, with the possible risk that they won't even say anything much at all.
Okay, so I think that we are in the end of this interview. Would you like to give an example of deconstruction of a word? If you would like to choose how to do it with NSM. You have just written a book.
Yes, I
heart,
have written a book on.
and soul.
Yeah, that's right.
Three
so
very important and spiritual concepts. So would you like and it's a very interesting book. I read it, and I think that people who are dealing and interested in medical humanities should read it, and I think that linguistics should be much more important at these tables where there are philosophers, anthropologists, physicians, nurses, social workers, and probably I forgot somebody else, so some other professions, but I think that really linguistics do have a tremendous expertise to bring in the narrative discourse.
We can't solve the medical problems, but we can at least help the medical specialists solve their medical problems if they use the proper language to do so. So, I mean, it is very hard to capture in a couple of words an entire explication of words that are potentially relevant in the medical humanities at large, or in narrative medicine more specifically. But if you take something like the mind, which lots of people tend to take for granted,
which is not a prime.
It's certainly not a prime, because it's a hugely complex construct, and lots of native speakers of English don't even begin to realize how culturally specific that word is. Instead, they write entire books about the body and the mind, and about the mind this and the mind that, as though everybody's got a mind. But that's not true. Only native speakers of English has something that corresponds exactly to the mind, and other people may have other, what I'd like to call ethno-psychological constructs. Different language such as Thai doesn't use the word mind, but they have a word such as chai, which corresponds more or less, but not completely, to the English heart.
Which is the little difference?
It is quite different.
Quite
even.
different.
Quite
So
different. And so, in order to explicate what the mind stands for, well, you've got to first of all give an idea of what it is. It is part of someone. It is not part of someone's body. People cannot see it, that sort of thing. And then you've got to, in another part of the explication, you need to say what it can do and what it can do. So because of this part, people can think many things about many things.
Yes.
Or people can...
Now you're using the words of the natural semantic
That's right.
Metalanguage.
Now
this is an example of deconstruction.
That is an example of deconstruction, yes. And then in the third part of the explication, you would have to, you might have to say something about what happens in the mind when it's actually involved in thinking or knowing. Because, for instance, in English we've got metaphors such as what's going on in his mind, and that going on seems to conjure up the idea of some internal dynamics in the mind, and there are lots of other similar constructs in other languages where things also happen in whatever that language is closest equivalent to the mind is.
So in Thai you don't say what's going on.
I can't remember the details about the Thai heart, but there are certainly languages where you can't talk about the mind in terms of something that happens. That's you're opening another can of worms, because basically rational is another very, very English concept.
Yes.
And then again, so yeah, a rational mind, it seems to work in English. Is there something like a rational mind in say Thai? Probably not, because the Thai chai, the heart, is already something that can be used also for feeling, and that's a very big difference between, say, the mind, the English mind, and concepts such as chai in Thai.
So it has also emotions included.
Absolutely.
So it's totally different from the English
that's
concept.
right, and there are too many specialists that who just don't want to admit that there is no such thing as the mind in other languages, in other cultures. They think the mind is something human, something universal, something that all humans share, but it's absolutely not true. I mean,
think is universal.
The word to think is universal, and to say that the mind is a part of someone, but not a part of someone's body, all these are universal ideas. But you see, and that's how we unpack a culturally very specific concept and make it clear, make it accessible to people of other cultures. Instead of imposing on them the word mind, as we do, for instance, and as people have been doing, well, this was not with mind but with soul, when for instance talking about a very Russian concept, which is the concept of dusha. It reminds it's sort of close to the English soul. It's not the same, but if you want to go for a shortcut, you could say, well, yes, dusha is the Russian soul. And from an English point of view, that probably sounds all right. Few native speakers of English would find that problematic, but it doesn't mean much at all to a Russian speaker. For a Russian speaker to be told that dusha is the Russian soul doesn't mean anything, because they don't have the concept of soul. They do have the concept of dusha. So what you've got to do is pull apart both concepts, both the concept of the mind and the concept of dusha, and then you can compare them, rather than to force a description in terms of mind onto dusha, or, which would be absolutely unacceptable from an English point of view, try to describe mind in terms of dusha. No native speaker of English would ever want to accept a definition of mind that is based on the word dusha.
Yeah, but
and yet we seem as
English people are colonizing
absolutely
all over the world with their concept of mind.
English speakers
cold
don't
mind, sharp mind. These are adjectives which are given to the word mind.
Yep, absolutely true.
Okay.
So what we need to do is dissect, deconstruct all these words, and then compare the definitions, and then we'll make real progress.
I think that your minimal English and your minimal languages are very important to somehow counteract and fighting the the
Anglocentrism and
ethnocentrism.
ethnocentrism. Yeah.
Yes, it's really very important. And I think that also the studying these words is very important because we are strong believers not only in the biopsychosocial model, but also in the biopsychosocial and spiritual model. So this is why we think that studying the spiritual words is very important, not only to consider a body just like a body, or just like a mix of emotions, or just like a mix of relationship with the others, but also when we are talking about spirituality, we are talking about ethics, we are talking about beliefs, we are talking about values and virtues. And so this is why, and we think that this spirituality also impacts without even knowing, but impacts a lot our well-being.
Oh, absolutely it does.
So this is why we think that studying the words like this, it's very useful. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Bert Peeters. It's an honor to have you here. You have been flying from Australia. Well, long trip, long flight. Thank you.